Let's make some models.
In this book is a very old scenery making guide. Shall we see if it's any good?
Enthusiastic fantasy modelers can easily be told apart from the rest of humanity. The signs are all too plain to see. The first indications may go unnoticed. A tendency to hoard pieces of polystyrene packaging under the bed. A marked and irrational preference for yogurt in oddly shaped pots. Unexplicable urges to collect deodorant bottle tops or similar afflictions. But by now the disease has a firm hold. To the deranged mind of the modeller, the world takes on a strange and different appearance. Pieces of polystyrene packing become buildings and bunkers. Dessert and margarine tubs are components for towers. Tins and cardboard tubes assume the proportions of mighty buildings. It is doubtful whether there is any cure for this condition. I have always been a sufferer for many years and know several other individuals with the same malady. Some occupying important positions of authority in society, professional people, and even one or two that are rumoured to be Freemasons. Clearly, the impulse bridges social classes and generations.
Now, I myself feel I am also affected by this affliction, and I bet you are too. Does it have a name? Addiction, I think.
The first section is devoted to modelling, but in the video that follows, specific techniques and methods of construction and embellishment are discussed in detail. This information is solid, practical stuff. You won't need any special skills or experience to attempt most of the projects. You will probably need a few special modelling tools, and you'll definitely need access to a basic toolkit including pliers, screwdrivers, and a sturdy craft knife. As with any handicraft or construction hobby, you must be careful and sensible, both with regards to your own safety and that of others. No slicing up your wife's fingers, please. You must also be considerate of work surfaces and environment. Some of these processes are fairly destructive, produce copious waste products, or cause unpleasant smells. If you share your home with others, you must also think about how you're going to store your creations. It's surprising how much space scenery takes up and how much dust it collects just sitting on a shelf.
Now, I do love to hoard stuff, but I am finding it increasingly difficult to find space for it all. I need a hoarding shed or some sort of porter cabin for it all. How much are porter cabins these days?
I like to try not to store any and every interesting looking box and packet that enters the house. I try, but somehow never quite manage to throw away the offending item. There is a definite boomerang effect. Just when one is about to throw away a piece of polystyrene, it suddenly becomes apparent that this is just what you've been looking for to make that much needed refueling point. If you're lucky enough to have almost infinite space to store household junk, then this is fine. You'll be amazed just how quickly your spare rooms, outhouses, cellars, attics and garages fill up with expanded polystyrene, cartons, boxes, bottle tops and assorted junk. If, however, you are unfortunate enough to have to share your habitation with other, possibly normal people, compromise may be necessary. In such a situation, it is important to plan your projects carefully, trying to acquire the various components without taking over the whole house.
Now, to prevent excessive waste and stuff piling up everywhere, I think it's always best to use the piece as soon as you get it, rather than stash it away, forget about it, or it gets damaged or thrown away into a basketball hoop apparently. And if you can't think of a use for it there and then, you should probably just hull it in the bin.
Expanded polystyrene is definitely the worst offender on this point, and it's necessary to develop an iron will when it comes to throwing out whatever the washing machine or central heating or cooker or the cleaner or the stereo arrived in. Apart from polystyrene packaging, almost every plastic pot, package and container can be made to serve a purpose. Even the most mundane and unconvincing bit of plastic will be found to have its uses. The sturdier the container, the more suited it will be for our purposes. But even quite flimsy packaging can be reinforced when necessary. Small tubs containing margarine, desserts or cream, for example, make excellent little towers if stacked together. If they're made from clear plastic, you have ready-made windows. Plastic drinks bottles can also be pressed into service as buildings or covered tubeways. Other household debris which may prove useful includes cardboard tubes from kitchen toweling, toilet rolls and foil, etc. Sturdy card or metal tins make the basis for good towers.
Now, I don't think these things come in nice metal containers anymore, but I have noticed that the Nesquik milkshake powder does come in a very interesting looking plastic container. It looks like a big jerry can. Go and have a look for yourself, especially when you pull that label off.
If you buy toothpaste, soap or other toiletries in rigid plastic dispensers, these will make excellent building features or the basis for defence towers, for example. The tops are often more useful than the actual containers. Pressurised metal containers are best avoided, but their tops make perfectly good turrets and observation domes. Soft plastic washing up bottles are a bit too pliable and lightweight unless you fill them with plaster of Paris, and rigid detergent bottles usually take some unpleasing or difficult shapes. Small plastic components are easier to store and collect and can include bottle tops, caps and packaging. Some superglue bottles are ideally shaped like large missiles, while the ubiquitous toothpaste cap can be used for engine vents. When throwing away electrical equipment, don't forget to gut it of interesting looking internal components. Put them all in a shoebox somewhere and start a collection. You'll be surprised how little bits and pieces can inspire a whole model.
I never clocked the toothpaste tube nozzles before. Nowadays, sadly, toothpaste tubes have big chunky lids, so you can't really use them anymore. They look more like dials on old 1980s stereos. Superglue lids, I think, still look kind of the same though, sort of pointy.
Many of your raw materials can be supplied by household junk, as described before. The disadvantage of using other materials to make your models is that they cost money. However, if you want to build a complete mega city over a weekend, the only really practical way to do it is to buy what you need. Some you'll have to buy anyway. Glue, pins, nails, paint, etc. You have to buy it, so there's no way you can avoid making at least a minor investment to satisfy your needs. Fortunately, most of the items needed are quite cheap, and those which are expensive can often be substituted by junk. The list we will now discuss represents just about every material we've ever used over the years, and modelers shouldn't feel obliged to use all of these materials, at least not on the same model. Buildings and artificial constructions have flat, slab-like sides, curved or cylindrical surfaces, or are amorphous and ill-defined. Flat surfaces are the easiest to construct, and a variety of materials can be used.
I always used to frequent a B&Q for all my hardware supplies needs, but I have since found that Wix is a lot cheaper, or Wikis as Mrs. Snakeworks likes to refer to it as. Can we go to Wikis this weekend?
Thick card is perhaps the easiest material to work with. The best sort to use is mounting board, which you can buy from any art shop. Card can be cut cleanly and without distorting using a steel ruler and a craft knife. Card walls can be joined using adhesive tape, and joints can be strengthened using triangular butting sections glued into place. Sections of balsa wood add rigidity and can be fixed in place with PVA glue and pins. Any contact adhesive will glue card adequately. A base will add considerable strength to the structure. Edges tend to fray if left exposed and can be taped over or covered at the texturing stage, which we'll cover later on.
Taping over the edges is a great technique, especially when using cardboard bases. Corrugated card, I mean, because they have that gap and you can cover it up with the tape.
Hardboard is more difficult to work with than cardboard, but much more durable. It can be bought in sheets from any DIY store in sizes of up to 4 foot by 8 foot. The main disadvantage of working with this material is that it's far tougher to cut than card. It's cut using a steel ruler and a craft knife. First marking out the section to be cut, and then lightly scoring the line, and then repeatedly scoring that line until a cut is made. This doesn't take long, but does involve some effort. Joins can be made in the same way as for card. Wooden battens will be needed to help hold the walls in place. Cut edges tend to look tatty, and the unfinished side will always look bad. This material also has a nasty habit of warping if it gets wet or hot, or both.
Now, I don't really seem to see that much hardboard around anymore. I wonder why that is.
Plywood is probably the most hard-wearing material to use as a basis for construction. It's available from DIY stores and in the same sizes as hardboard. Ply is quite rigid and won't warp in the same way as card or hardboard, but using it does require a few woodworking skills. Although ply can be cut with a craft knife, this isn't recommended for large sections, and a jigsaw or hacksaw will be needed. On the plus side, quite small and intricate shapes can be cut, and there is no danger of the edges fraying. The actual finish is quite rough and requires the addition of a proper texture, but the result is well worth the effort. Ply can be joined with PVA glue and pins. Supporting battens will help to keep the walls in place.
Cutting plywood with a knife? We're going to be there forever.
Expanded polystyrene, intended for insulation, can be bought from large DIY stores again in 8x4 foot sheets, usually around 1.5 inches thick. Ceiling tiles can be used too, although these are much thinner, usually about 1 centimetre. Polystyrene is a pain in the arse to cut. Bits of it go everywhere. It's also delicate and inclined to break exactly where you don't want it to. A special polystyrene cutter is available, using a hot wire to cut the material. This makes a very neat job and will save you a lot of effort. Otherwise, the best tool to use is a bread knife. Joins are made using PVA glue and cocktail sticks as pins. Most glues melt expanded polystyrene, so be careful. Because this material is so light, a base may be needed to stop the construction falling over. It is necessary to put a proper finish on polystyrene, otherwise it has a nasty habit of looking like polystyrene. A proper finish will also prevent bits falling off and help to lengthen the model's life.
I still don't have a hot wire cutter, or a lightsaber, as apparently that looks like. But I do plan on getting one day though. If you guys can recommend a good quality branded one, then please let me know in the comments below. There's so many out there, I don't know which ones are good.
Most hobbyists will be familiar with Plasticard, the thin plastic sheeting used by vehicle enthusiasts to make their own tanks and trucks, etc. This is too expensive and flimsy to use for buildings, although it can be used for detail, but the larger, thicker sheets sold at DIY shops are ideal. Plain, clear, unpatterned sheets are sold for temporary double glazing and making lightweight partitions and doors. Coloured plastic is also available, and some is heat resistant, which is important if you are contemplating rigging out your buildings with electronics. This material can be cut by scoring and snapping, or by cutting with a suitable saw. A modelling saw or small hacksaw is ideal. It can also be drilled like wood and cut into curving shapes if you have a suitable saw attachment for an electric drill. Joins are made using plastic glues, and additional plastic battens or triangular fillets can be used for increased rigidity. The finish does not readily accept further paint or texture, although holding power is improved if sheets are sanded or scored before construction.
I think they are referring to big acrylic sheets here, and those are bloody hard to work with. I once had a big sheet of acrylic that I tried to make something for my fish tank, and it just kept cracking and splitting, and it was awful. I wouldn't want to use acrylic anymore. Unless you've got the right tools, like big table saws and things, I think it's a nightmare.
Plastic kitchenware is available in all sorts of shapes, including squarish lunchboxes, freezer tubs and the like. Although it is relatively expensive to buy in quantity, these do provide an almost ready-made basis for your building. Unfortunately, the plastic is soft and difficult to glue, but it can be cut easily with a craft knife. Supposedly, Tupperware provided the basis for much of the scenery in at least one science fiction TV series.
This craft, for example, is built from 2 hairdryers. And just to emphasise the point,
a cheaper alternative is freezer ice cream tubs. Cat litter trays and pet food dishes are also cheap, convenient, and come in various sizes. Round, cylindrical or curved surfaces can often look more pleasing to the eye than a simple flat surface. Styles of architecture vary tremendously throughout the Imperium, so anything goes really. It's almost impossible to make a cylinder from flat sheets, so only ready-made cylinders are considered.
Now, which sci-fi TV show do you think they're talking about? It might be the Mysteron base on Mars. That looked a bit Tupperwareified. See if I can find a clip.
You will be instrumental in avenging the Mysterons.
And also, speaking about ice cream tubs, every time I get one, I do find them hard to throw away. To throw away, boy! To throw away.
Heavy-duty card cylinders are used to store many industrial items such as shrink wrapping, paper and cloth. If you know someone who works anywhere where such materials are used, they may be able to acquire the waste cylinders for you. Otherwise, you are restricted to the lighter versions used for toilet tissue and kitchen towel, for example.
Now, I used to like Pringles tubes, but I find they're a lot thinner now. They're not as hard as they used to be. They're all sort of flimsy and weak. It's because the cardboard is more like paper. It's rubbish. You can get nice big hard cardboard tubes with the likes of cheeselets though, but they only seem to sell those at Christmas. Or was that treeslets?
Plastic plumbing can be bought from building suppliers and from some of the larger DIY stores. The different diameters of the pipes can be exploited to give varied building shapes. Large soil pipes are the best. These are the ones that connect the toilet to the sewerage system. This material, however, is fairly tough and you will need a saw to cut it. Drainpipe is also difficult to glue and sections will need to be drilled and well supported if they're to stay in place.
I had a look at some Drainpipe at the local B&Q and I thought, yes, that would make nice spaceship corridors. But the joins and the corners were really bloody expensive, so that put a stop to that idea.
Metal or plastic bottles, cans or containers are ideal for most purposes and readily attainable as junk. Epoxy adhesives may be required to join pieces together.
You can't beat a bean tin power station, can you? Or a Coke can silo on stilts. I think nowadays you can even get like MDF upgrade kits for Coke cans and bean tins, but I've never bought one myself. I see them everywhere though, they must be good.
A plastic garden bin or domestic dustbin provides the basis for a good big building. The bottom can be cut off to a height of around 12 inches and inverted to form the base of the building, while the remaining sections can be put to use as terracing. Better still, although expensive, are water butts and brewing bins. The same goes for regularly shaped waste paper bins, paint tins and other large cans, buckets, tins, pots and pans.
I have never considered using bins as terrain. They're bloody massive. Unless they mean like a little waste paper basket or something. I was stuttering my P's there like pancake day. Pancake day.
It's pancake day, yes it's pancake day, yes it's pancake day. Well it's pancake day, it's really pancake day, yes it's pancake day.
It's not long till pancake day actually. Shrove Tuesday. Shrove Tuesday.
Plastic plant pots are cheap and readily available. They don't glue too well, but are fairly easy to cut using a craft knife and can be drilled to take supporting structures. There are rigid plastic planters available, which are either cylindrical or square, but these are rather expensive. As well as the actual pots, use can be made of drip trays, which are shallow plastic dishes, and window trays, which are very shallow, usually large dishes, which are usually long and thin. Whilst buying your plant pots at your local gardening centre, you might also find some seed trays, which make excellent low buildings.
Now I actually have an idea to use an old plant pot to make some sort of gun turret emplacement. It's like a square turret. I reckon it'll look like the Death Star turrets from Star Wars, and I think it'll be great. That's if I ever get round to making it. Better put it on my to-do list now.
Drying racks and cutlery trays and drainers may sound unpromising, but some are quite suitable for conversion. Washing up bowls can be used for larger buildings in the same way as buckets and bins. Cheap plastic storage jars are very good, often coming in a rigid plastic that's easier to glue and will bear more weight. Amorphous shapes can often be produced by using unexpected pieces of standard containers. Cutting cylinders off at strange angles, for example.
Now apparently all of the following materials are useful. I'm intrigued to see what they have in store for us.
Plaster of Paris is an excellent material for making buildings of any shape. It can be bought fairly cheaply from larger chemists and only requires mixing with water before it's ready to use. Add the plaster to the water rather than the other way around. Solid plaster buildings have the disadvantage of being relatively heavy and all plaster constructions damage easily. It is impossible to avoid chips and scratches, but a proper wooden base will help. To make a plaster building, you will need some sort of mould or former. The easiest method is to cast the piece into damp sand. A bucket or other container of damp sand is the basis of this method. Hollows and various shapes are carved into the sand by pressing in differently shaped objects until a negative image of your building is formed. Children's toys are ideal for this. Differently sized balls are especially useful for making domes. The plaster mixture is poured in and allowed to dry. The completed casting can be mounted on a base and painted. Further texturing is not necessary, as the grain of the sand leaves a naturally roughened surface.
Now, I've always found that plaster cast rocks made in this way always look good. We also need to have a go at making those Hab Domes, which are made in the same way. Mr. Trent from Miscast has made some of those. I'll see if I can stick a link up here for you. Go and have a look, they look very good.
There are several materials on the market which can be used to make smaller buildings or features. These include the 2-part epoxy putty Milliput, DAS modelling clay which hardens on exposure to air, Fimo or Fimo which is oven baked to harden, and good old fashioned Plasticine. Plasticine cannot be hardened, but is still useful for making small improvised items on the battlefield. It can of course be reused almost indefinitely. All the other materials are relatively expensive, and their use is best confined to detailing your creations.
Now, I used to play around with clay a lot as a kid all the time. These days I like to use it for padding out bases.
Paper mache is rather messy, but buildings made with it are light. Used over a wooden, wire or paper and card former, it gives an irregular surface. This means it can be used to make irregular shapes otherwise impractical or difficult. Similar results can be obtained by wrapping plaster-soaked cloth around a former. Buildings made in this way look somewhat like termite mounds and are ideal for representing the artificial accretions of insects or similarly minded creatures.
You know, I can't say I've ever seen a paper mache building before. Or is the correct term papier mache? I don't think I've actually seen any paper mache scenery, come to think of it, but I do think it would be quite interesting to try out one day. Paper mache sort of rock face sounds like it would be easy to do. A building, just too regular, I think.
The secret of making a mundane tin or tub into a convincing building is finish and detail. Finish refers to the actual texture of the surface, whereas detail refers to the various bits and pieces that represent doors, pipes, and other paraphernalia. Many of the modelling materials discussed before give a totally featureless or flat finish, especially if they're plastic based. This never looks right, and the illusion of scale is destroyed by the way the flat, shiny surface reflects light. To overcome this, a separate finish is applied, the aim of which is to provide a roughened texture. Even a slightly roughened texture will improve the model, and all surfaces should be treated in this way, even vehicle hulls and other metallic flat surfaces. Texture is usually applied with a fairly large and old brush. Brushes subjected to this treatment won't last long anyway. The texture mixture can be varied from fine to coarse, depending on the required finish.
So according to this, a smooth finish on tanks looks wrong, but wouldn't the scale effect also scale down any texture on a vehicle, therefore making it look smoother in a smaller scale? We need a scale expert in here. Are there any scale experts out there?
Experiment with finishes until you find a result you like. The basis for the mixture is a ready mixed plaster such as Tetrion, but any comparable product will do. This can be thinned to an almost paint-like consistency or thickened with anything from fine dust to sand. Scouring powder is ideal. Mix your chosen components and test the mixture out on a piece of scrap before deciding on a final finish. Finer mixtures can be prepared with ordinary modelling paint and scouring powder. This gives the best finish for vehicles and smooth surfaces. Covering a large area will require a lot of paint, however. Areas which are to form windows can be left untextured, and the slight depth of material surrounding them will help to make the window look recessed. A good finish makes the job of painting easier and the final model far more convincing. Rough textures are ideal for dry brushing. Dense textures will overcome faults in construction or unwanted finishes on raw materials.
It's much easier to do these days with aerosol texture effects, also known as rattle cans. You get like stone effect, concrete effect, weird mottled effects, cracked effects, all sorts of effects. They come in loads of types. I usually get mine from the range as they're quite cheap in there, and it's also just up the road, so it's quite convenient.
Adding detail to your basic shape will transform it from a tub or a can into a building. Lots of detail also helps cover up any modelling mistakes and untidy construction. Collecting materials for detailing is a bit like collecting the basic components, a full-time profession. Fortunately, parts required for detailing are generally small and don't take up so much space.
I believe they refer to this as greebling in the trade. I've seen a few Star Wars and Aliens documentaries over the years where they talk about this and go into a bit of detail on it. Also, that Adam Savage fellow does it quite a bit as well, although I never really could get into his videos. I don't know why, they're actually quite good when I do watch them.
Possibly the most useful things ever invented. Use them for all kinds of piping. Assorted sizes are available, and some have flexible bends which look good. Unfortunately, these days they're made of paper and not half as useful.
Plastic straws these days are notoriously hard to find. We all know why that is. You can get them through the likes of Temu and Wish though, if you really need them. Or if you take a time machine back to 1990 and go to McDonald's, you can get a whole wodge of them there. Time machines themselves though are quite hard to come by.
Small bore flexible airline can be bought from pet shops which sell aquatic supplies together with interesting connecting bits. Larger bore piping can be carefully scavenged, bits of hose pipe for example. Being flexible, these items don't take finishes too well. This can be overcome by using wire inside the tubes, which also keeps them in shape.
I never thought of using wire inside the pipe before. I think that's quite clever. And I do think I have some aquarium airline somewhere that might work for this sort of thing, although I don't have any actual wire on standby.
Wire is absolutely essential for most modelling projects, and it can be used both as a construction aid and for detail. Modelling shops sell wire in assorted sizes. Fuse wire can be bought from electrical shops, and welding rod is available from some DIY and hardware shops. Wire is useful for making smaller pipes, catches, handles, aerials, roll bars for vehicles, and gun barrels, for example.
Like I said before, I don't have any wire on hand, but I should probably get some as it does sound quite useful. Even some guitar string or something.
Model construction kits are a ready source of bits and pieces. Professional model makers use existing kits in just the same way. Look carefully the next time you watch a sci-fi film or TV series. You may be able to pick up discounted kits from your local model shop, or you may have old models that can be cannibalised. Buying new models just for the bits is rather expensive, so choose your model carefully. Warships are probably the most useful, especially if they have large turrets and lots of deck equipment.
Buying random kits just for the... Hello, Dick Tracy? Hello? He's calling me again. Buying random kits just for the sake of getting bits to detail with does sound like it's going to get expensive very quickly. However, you might be able to get cheap second-hand ones with bits missing and stuff off Facebook Marketplace and the like, if you dare go on such a site. Maybe someone needs to release just a kit for greebling, loads of sprues with just parts on. I think that would be awesome. You could do away with like the main hull parts and just have all those little details like pipes and lights and spanners and scanners. I think it would be wonderful. Someone please make it.
Plasticard, card and paper can be used to scratch build surface details of all kinds, panels, doors, hatches and vents for example. A simple scattering of oblong panels on the surface will make a plain building or vehicle look much more interesting. If your building is of an old-fashioned type, a scattering of slab shapes will give the impression of brick or stone. Keystones at corners will help to disguise where walls join, and will neaten doorways and windows. Individual pieces of card, paper or Plasticard can be used to make roofing tiles for rustic buildings, and can be made regular or irregular depending on the effect you want. Paving slabs can also be represented in this way. All slabs and panels should be finished in the same way as the general surface. Clear plastic can be used for windows if glued on the inside of holes cut into the building's walls.
Now I've seen some people do fantastic scratch built jobs with Plasticard. My old friend Tinners comes to mind. Hello Tinners if you're watching. These things do look bloody amazing, but they are also very, very time consuming, and it's probably just cheaper to buy a kit of the thing rather than spend 40-50 hours making it.
Many pins have decorative heads, which are ideal for representing small knobs, buttons or rivets. Ball bearings come in various sizes and can be used in a similar way to provide extra detail. Beads can be used too, and are easier to fasten using wire. Drawing pins make excellent ventilation covers if pushed halfway into the surface.
I've met a few people over the years who are good at using small knobs, and I've also heard that the bead section at Hobbycraft is meant to be good for detailing bits and greebling bits. But my local Hobbycraft has got rid of their whole bead section, so you can't get them anymore. I'd have to go on like Amazon or Temu or something. Where'd you get your beads from?
The spoon part of plastic spoons make excellent domes or cockpits. Medicine spoons are best, so save them, and any clear spoon can be used to make a clear dome. Plastic cutlery picnic sets are cheap and great to buy.
The best use of a spoon is on the old deodorant hover tank, or grav tank I should say. One day we're going to make one. One day. Please don't let me forget. Keep reminding me. Every time you see this video, say, have you made that deodorant grav tank yet? Unless I've already made it, in which case you don't need to say it. But I probably won't have made it. I think it's going to be a long time until we get around to that. Better put it on my to-do list now.
Buildings, vehicles and other scenery can be painted using ordinary modelling paint. Although large buildings may require so much paint, it's a better idea to invest in a tin of emulsion or a car body spray. Paint the model in the basic colour and let the whole thing dry. Shading and highlighting can then be applied, simulating the natural fall of shadow and light on the construction. Shadows are applied using a thinned down dark version of the basic colour. This can be painted around doors, panels and any bits that stick out, representing shadows that appear on such surfaces. Complex grills and detail can be shaded by painting the whole area with thinned dark paint and then quickly wiping the raised areas with a clean cloth or tissue. The effect is to leave dark pigment in the recesses, but the detail is the same colour as before and will stand out.
I've never tried this quick wipe method. It actually sounds like it might work quite well, and I think it's worth a try, I think. Have any of you tried it? Does it work? It's similar to how they work with oil paints, isn't it? You know, you put it on, let it dry and wipe the excess off. But in this way you just do it with normal paints and quickly rub it off.
A similar idea is lining. This is best explained by painting a white number or logo onto your model and then carefully outlining the white with a thin line of black or other dark colour. The contrast between the number and the wall is now much more obvious, correctly simulating the way large areas of colour contrast with each other in real life.
Although they don't look perfect, I do like the look of the old free-handed numbers and symbols. I think they look good. Now if you fancy talking Oldhammer model scenery making, then please feel free to come along and join us on our friendly Discord server, which is not behind a paywall. There's a link in the description below, and I'll stick one up here for you too. We look forward to chatting to you there.
Once you've finished any dark shades, you can apply the light shades or highlights. This is done by dry brushing. Prepare a light shade of the basic colour. Take a good sized brush and dip it into the paint and then wipe away most of the pigment, leaving only a suggestion of the colour on the brush. Now draw the brush across raised areas of the building, and you'll see how the particles of paint stick to the surface, giving a feeling of depth to the model. The same process can be used on a textured surface to improve the impression of solidity. Using progressively lighter shades, a correct simulation of depth can be built up. Even vehicles will benefit from this treatment and will take on the appearance of a real model rather than toys or kits.
Now I've recently got into dry brushing my vehicles again. I did used to be a big airbrush fan, but for some reason I'm starting to find the look of airbrushed stuff a little bit soulless and repetitive. They all look the same to me. It's all sort of a cookie cutter painting by numbers style now, which I feel has lost some of the creativity and soul behind it. It's very hard to explain how I feel about it, you know? And also, I do feel that dry brushing looks good. Now speaking of good, if you're enjoying this video, then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, Adam. If you are enjoying the content on this channel, then please consider joining us on Patreon, the link to which is in the description below, and I'll stick one up here for you too. Or you could even become a channel member, which is becoming all the rage these days. Again, there's a link to that in the description below.
Extensions of shading and highlighting can be used to add detail to a building. Dark areas will look recessed and light areas will look raised, even if they're not. In this way, you can paint on a bas-relief frieze, building stones and even doors and windows. Practice and experience will be needed before you become an expert.
Now, did you think any of those modelling or scenery making tips were useful? Would you like to try any of those old techniques? If you do try them, let us all know the results in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching.